This is Jed Disler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. Consider taking out a paid subscription to this podcast, and you can find the link to do so in my episode description, and paid subscribers get a free download at the start of each month, and you're in for quite a treat if you decide to take out a paid subscription. There's a recent release from Warner Classics by the pianist Piotr Anderszewski, devoted to late piano works of Johannes Brahms. He picks and chooses works from the groups of short pieces encompassing Opus 116, Opus 117, Opus 118, and Opus 119. He doesn't play these cycles complete, but rather he cherry picks and he puts pieces together in a highly evocative running order. This is kind of similar to what Arkady Volodos did in his 2017 release devoted to various selections from Brahms in his late period piano pieces, Klavierstück. Now, some collectors may complain that Piotr Anderszewski did not give us complete opus numbers, which is often the case on CD, where you have pianists who play all of the Opus 117 through 119, and they also may include the Opus 76 8 pieces. But if you think about the great Brahms players of the past, like Wilhelm Backhaus or Arthur Rubinstein, they didn't record complete sets of the late pieces, and I don't think anyone complained about that back in the day. Even Glenn Gould recorded works that just had the title Intermezzo, and I didn't hear anybody complain that he didn't play all of Opus 116 or 118 or whatever. But let's talk about Piotr Anderszewski. He is a highly intelligent and cultivated musician, and he puts a great deal of thought and consideration into his program building. You remember he did that beautifully curated selection of preludes and fugues from Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier Book 2. I think that was back in 2020. A really wonderful disc, which I will talk about on another episode. But this Brahms disc reveals a similar kind of programming mindset. Piotr Anderszewski begins with the B minor intermezzo, Opus 119, number 1, and this is one of Brahms' most introspective and lament-like piano pieces. Anderszewski plays this piece pretty much in a strict and measured tempo, and he makes his expressive points through careful voice leading and slightly leaning into the dissonances. And when the main theme returns at the end, the pianist ever so slightly lingers on certain upbeats, putting a kind of hesitant spin on the music. It's less desolate than it was before, and this change in emphasis is quite subtle. I think it's quite a beautiful performance. The graceful C major intermezzo, Opus 119, number 3, comes next. That was the one that Myra Hess made famous as an encore. And it's quite a contrasting character, needless to say. Although Anderszewski is attentive to detail, I prefer a little more lightness to this music in terms of articulation and a kind of offhanded lilt. In this sense, I think that Stephen Hough better succeeds in his recording, and there is also comparable lightness in Rado Lubu's recording, although he's a bit dry, comparatively speaking. The next piece, Opus 118, number 1, this is a work I really don't like. I think because I find the theme sort of pompous. I don't know, there's something about that theme that just rubs me the wrong way. That's my problem, not Brahms' problem. But this performance is very convincing because every phrase conveys independence and the lines resolve on their own volition, so it seems. The ebb and flow of the performance is horizontally oriented rather than in vertical blocks of phrases, and I think that really helps move things along. Opus 118, number 2, is next. That's the A major intermezzo. And this is a piece that I absolutely adore. I love it beyond belief. And again, Piotr Anderszewski takes his sweet time, bringing the left hand just enough to the forefront and using the most subtle pedal effects. The performance is similar in ways to Igor Levit's recent recording in terms of expression, but I think that Anderszewski is more specifically detailed. But I compared him to Emanuel Ax out of curiosity. And in this case, I felt that Emanuel Ax and his phrasing had much more of a vocal trajectory and lyrical warmth, very much in the Arthur Rubinstein manner. Although I love the Anderszewski performance in and of itself, but it was just that back-to-back comparison. I couldn't help myself. And the singing qualities of the Emanuel Ax performance really do hit home. And it's interesting that Anderszewski goes directly from this piece into the Opus 116, number 2, because you have the similar rhythm. This is the A minor intermezzo, because you have the A major, da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, and then the A minor intermezzo is bum-bum-bum, bum-bum-bum. So these pieces dovetail quite nicely. Sometimes I feel that Anderszewski's little pauses at phrase ends can get predictable, but I think he justifies his approach by showing a real sense of long lines, and also the delicacy that he brings to the middle section is just ravishing. Next we have Opus 116, number 3. Usually you hear pianists approach this in a very forthright manner, very directly and very rhythmic, and that is understandable because that's in the music's character. But here, Piotr Anderszewski again favors rhythmic give and take, and he concentrates on how the contrapuntal lines should move. So whatever you lose in forward momentum, you gain tenfold in horizontal clarity. The E major, Opus 116, number 4, gets a lovely and kind of conversational performance in how the right and left hand interact. I normally prefer a little more push and more movement in the central episode, and in this case I think Julius Ketchen really gets it right in terms of the tempo, but this is a very beautiful performance in and of itself. Now, Opus 116, number 5, you have those two-note phrases, bottom, 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 bottom. I don't quite remember it the second and I'm singing it really horribly. But it's difficult to make these two-note phrases sound natural while at the same time observing Brahms' articulations. And here, I think that Anderszewski's attention to detail borders on being self-aware. He sounds relatively studied, whereas if you listen to the Wilhelm Kempff recording, his articulation is a little more clipped. Ba-da, 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 ba-da. I don't know if he accents the first note or the second note. Does he go ba-da, bottom, or does he go ba-da, 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 bottom? I listened to it preparing for this talk, and now I forgot what he does. I'm such an idiot today. But what I'm saying is that Kempff conveys a simplicity and a sly humor in what he does. But I think to bring this piece off, you have to play it a little more simply than how Anderszewski plays it. And there is one pianist who I think really, really gets it right, and she's a pianist who deserves wider recognition, Elena Kushnerova. If you haven't heard about her, check her out. Maybe you can find her recording on YouTube or on a streaming platform. And what I love is that she conveys just the right character in those phrases without working too hard or protesting too much, as they say. Now we go to the Opus 117 group of 3 pieces, and Anderszewski plays that mysterious third piece in a very beautiful and fluid way. Maybe Radulupu's more veiled kind of sonority in the main theme conveys more of the music's seeming ambiguity, but I'm splitting hairs. Anderszewski really does play this wonderfully well. His performance of the Opus 119 number 4, the that big pompous chord-based piece. It's not totally pompous. I mean, you have to really be careful with this music. Perhaps with Anderszewski, the fullness of the chords is a little bit understated for my taste, and here I prefer Radulupu. And then you hear the intermezzo, Opus 117, number 2, in B-flat minor. Here, I think Anderszewski creates a beautiful surface with every line gorgeously contoured, and none of the habitual rushing of the fast notes that one often hears. Sometimes you hear da-dum, 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 ba-bum, and, you want a much more steady trajectory. Although I guess the rushing is maybe a kind of tradition because Rubinstein tended to do that, and even Emanuel Ax does that a little bit. But I was curious to do another comparison, so I listened to the Anderszewski recording, and then I pulled down Walter Giesecke's recording that was originally on Columbia Masterworks. And I was surprised just how much freer and more poetic and inflected the melodic lines were in Giesecke's hands. And he is not a pianist who I normally love in Brahms, but if you do make the comparison between Anderszewski and Giesecke just in this piece, it's rather revealing. Now the question is, does Anderszewski approach all of these late Brahms piano pieces on more or less the same expressive and emotional level? One might argue that point, but his combination of high workmanship and probing artistry really drew me in and made me listen and brought me into this pianist's sound world. And that's no small achievement. And this disc, by the way, is beautifully engineered. So even if you may wind up preferring other pianists in certain pieces in the end, it's definitely worth spending time with Piotr Anderszewski's late Brahms. He obviously loves this music. He obviously takes it seriously. But most importantly, he has something to say about this music that should be heard. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. And I look forward to being with you for our next episode. Who knows what I'm going to talk about next time?